Thank you, Eleanor, and thank you all for your hospitality. I'm very excited to be here. I'm going to talk about peer review in a changing and challenging scholarly publication world, because that's what it is. In my 35 years of scholarly publishing, I have never seen such a time of rapid change. So many new things happening, also very shocking things. So we're living in a world that is changing in good ways and also bad ways. Because peer review is part of scholarly publishing, it too is changing dramatically. So today I'm hoping to create an awareness of some of the new things that are happening and what you can do at a practical level to try and avoid the problems. Not that long ago, this is how we worked in journal offices, everything on paper, index files. When you came back from vacation, it looked like that. You know, some people maybe still work like this, but the majority of journals, especially those that aspire to be international, are working online. This was pre-internet, pre-email. We had to phone people. Now, the internet has brought amazingly positive things, the ability to reach parts of the world we couldn't before. We couldn't use reviewers in certain parts of the world because the postal system would take too long, it was too expensive. We can reach anybody now, and authors can also submit. Before, you had to submit proper photographs. So it's brought good, but it's also brought bad things, which I will tell you. And the imagination of the people who are doing bad things has no boundaries. And I am shocked on almost a monthly basis at some of the things that I hear. And if you know about these things, there's a higher chance that you'll be able to be aware of them and address them. Peer review is a subject of great international discussion. And I don't know if it's the same in Lithuania, that you're hearing things from outside. You will hear people say, peer review is broken. We want to get rid of peer review. This is very common. It is stretched, and this is part of the problem. But for me personally, I'm very positive about peer review. I've written a book on it, and I'm very excited that there is the Lithuanian translation. So people also say, what is peer review? It's so complicated. It isn't. And when I wrote a chapter for a book a few years ago, I created this definition. Peer review in scholarly publishing is the process by which research output is subjected to scrutiny and critical assessment by individuals who are experts in those areas. Scrutiny and critical assessment by experts. Why would that not be a good thing? It is a very, very good thing, and it's what we aspire to, but it's how you do it and who is an expert. And the ICMJE say the review has to be done by people who are outside the journal, the platform, not just by the editorial staff. So very, very simple definition. And I use research output because the assessment of research is moving beyond just publications. It's moving to data, other kinds of scientific product. So you have to be able to focus on not just assessing research papers that are submitted for publication. Very rapidly evolving area, but again, it's good to have an awareness of the things that are going on. And I used to have to say this a lot, but I still hear people say, open access journals, they don't have peer review, they don't have good peer review. It's totally wrong. Good practice and quality in peer review are system, access, and business model independent. That means, we have traditional journals, very well-established journals, that have been shown to have total failures in their peer review processes by all the major publishers. And I'm going to show you examples where the failure on a massive scale. We have open access journals that have superb peer review processes. So again, you cannot make this kind of distinction that open access poor, traditional subscription journals good. And this is an example of something very new. I'm on the editorial board of Learned Publishing, a journal. And this month, we've published this case study, which has introduced a very worrying element. Ulf mentioned predatory journals, predatory publishers, questionable publishers. These are a real issue. And they have names that will convince people, especially in areas of the world where they don't know how to distinguish a good journal from a bad journal, international journal of this. This researcher, his son, who is 7, wrote a paper on bats. They wanted to test a journal. So the little boy wrote a 153-word paper. They submitted it to the International Journal of something. it was accepted for publication after peer review. He did very simple sentences. Bats are cool animals. Now, these predatory journals, questionable journals, I call them, they have gone after people's money because the internet has introduced the opportunity for people to make a lot of money from researchers and research funders. They are not just taking people's money now, they are potentially taking their reputations. You won't be able to see this in detail. This is what the little boy wrote. This is what came back at proof stage. A completely different paper, but with those authors' names. His father is also an author. The two wrote it together. When they looked at what had happened, this company, this journal, had gone out and they took and plagiarized 2 existing papers from the internet, from legitimate journals, and they were going to publish this. These researchers then stopped the experiment. Because if this paper had been published with their names, these 2 people, including this 7-year-old, would have been accused of plagiarism. So your reputation is at stake. It is not just money. So go and have a look at that. And again, when you have a chance to read it, I've just taken a bit of text out. The damage would have been even greater as it would have resulted in a severe academic misconduct. So you have to be so clever nowadays to avoid this sort of thing. This is this month's issue of Learned Publishing. So how has peer review been changing? A big movement internationally is increasing transparency and openness. Now, this is a very good thing. But each journal, each community has to decide what is best for itself. There are some people who want everything open. The name of the reviewer, you publish the reviews, you publish the paper first, you review in public. But that's not suitable for everybody, and maybe not suitable for early career researchers who want to have the choice. But generally, it's a very good thing. And also, these are very good resource places to find out what do reviews look like. For early career researchers, they would never normally see many reviews. So like the EMBO journals have done it for a long time. You can go to each paper, and there is a peer review process file which gives you anonymously the reviews, the editorial correspondence. Biomed Central journals have done it for a long time, and it's increasing. Increasing interaction. eLife, the new journal set up by the Howard Hughes Wellcome Trust and Max Planck Institute, they involve at the decision stage the reviewers, the editor. They talk about it and then come up with a decision. These are very valuable, but these are incredibly resource intensive in terms of people time. So not every journal can do this kind of thing, but this is again what people are doing. New models. And what we're seeing is an incredible range, but also it's moving outside of the journal sphere. There are many new players coming into this area. Some are coming with a lot of funding. We have people who know nothing about scholarly publishing, who know nothing about peer review, who are entering the field. But we also have people who have been scholarly publishing for a long time. They are entering it and they have a lot of experience, expertise, and they're doing really, really good work. And these are, you can call them threats to journals, but it's part of the new world. And so journals have got to keep up with what is happening with these new players if they want to stay and be successful and get researchers to come to them. Why would we want to publish in that platform, that journal? And something that has been a problem for many years is the wastage of reviews. You think about what a researcher will do. They will submit a paper to one journal, it may get rejected. They'll go to another journal, it's reviewed again, maybe rejected. Those reviews are wasted. It could be reviewed 4 times, this wastage. And Rubric, a company, they've estimated that the number of hours lost a year of reviewers working on rejected manuscripts is 15 million hours a year. This is wrong. So now we have all these new models coming in where you share reviews. You move them from journal to journal in a cascading system. Again, quite a complex system, lots of new initiatives. We have independent peer review providers doing this. Authors can buy reviews. Again, a complex environment, but a very, very important one because there aren't enough reviewers. Every editor I meet says it's harder and harder to find reviewers, even for very prestigious journals. Why waste? Why waste the reviews? But there are various ethical issues, so it's not as straightforward as it seems. Post-publication peer review. Very, very important. Peer review doesn't actually start till the work is published. Then the eyes of the world are on it. And we are seeing papers from Nature, Science, the day after they're published, the community coming in, real experts, and saying, there's something seriously wrong with that paper. It happens with all journals, but I'm just using that example to say it's happening at the most prestigious journals. PubPeer, if any of you know about PubPeer, if you go and look, it's an anonymous commenting site, but they are bringing up a lot of papers in the literature and going back 20 years, 25 years, and so we're seeing a lot of retractions, corrections. And the big new change is the new third-party services. Some are very, very valuable. They have been around for a long time. Now, in scholarly publishing, we have 3 groups of people. So here, this is the research community. They're acting as authors, reviewers, editors, often all at the same time. Then we have, outside the research community, these 2 groups, editorial staff, staff editors, because I was a staff editor. I was an editor for 20 years, so I have seen things that nobody should see sometimes. I've seen good things, bad things, and ugly things. And then we have the owners. And then we have the third-party service providers. And they are interacting with each of those groups, and it's a two-way interaction because they're using their services. They have always existed, and they have provided like editing of manuscripts, language assistance. And they are still very reputable third-party service providers. The system could not function without them. But in that group now, we have people coming in who, again, doing things just to get money. And there is a lot of money going around. Some of them, good services, some have shocking practices. And if anyone wants to be shocked, has anyone in this room read China's publication Bazaar? It appeared in Science in November 2013. Nobody. Go and read that paper, because when I read it, I could not believe this. They did a 5-month investigation of publication practices in China and the people who were using the services of third-party service providers in China. They followed papers from provisional acceptance, and they looked at the authorship on those papers. And we've known for a long time that authorship is for sale on papers at manuscript stage. It's wrong, totally unethical, but you can buy an authorship position. These were selling authorship at provisional accept stage on minor revision, and they followed these papers at reputable journals. We are talking ISI indexed journals, and the names of these people who had bought the authorship appeared in the final paper. That is shocking. $26,000 you can pay, but that is a good return on investment if it means you get tenure, you get promotion. When I gave a talk previously, I went to look at a number of third-party service providers randomly, reputable ones, irreputable ones, and I looked, do they have codes of conduct? Do they have ethical guidelines? Only one of the 7, I'm not going to do any names, only one of the 7 have. All of them should have guidelines, because the responsibilities to the community, authors, reviewers, readers, the scholarly literature, keeping it sound, they're exactly the same for the third-party service providers. So I would urge any third-party service providers, please create guidance for the people who are coming to you and for your own practices, because they do not exist at the moment. Kind of challenges. Can people hear me? Yes, okay. Lack of knowledge. Now, I deal a lot with universities, particularly in the UK, with researchers and early career researchers. So I know that there is lack of knowledge of even the most basic principles. And when I talk to a group of new PhD students, or even ones 2-3 years in, I ask a very simple question. I say to them, how many people in this room know that you cannot submit the same manuscript to more than one journal at a time? Very few people know that. But if nobody tells them and they do it, that's misconduct. It impinges on them, their university, their country. No, somebody has to tell them. So this is one of the missions I have at the moment. We have lack of awareness. in the research community, but also on the editorial side. I'm talking international journals because I talk to a lot of journals. They are unaware of new initiatives like preprint servers. Preprint servers in certain disciplines are becoming very important. Physics have had them for 25 years. I'm using words, people afterwards ask me because you will not know some of these things. The archive preprint server, where you submit something before you submit to a journal for peer review. There is now one in biology, and it's successful because Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory started it. It's called bioRxiv. So journals are using plagiarism detection software, which is almost the norm nowadays, but a lot of people do not know how to use these systems. They're textual duplication, they're not plagiarism detection. A human being has to make that assessment. You could have a paper that when you receive it has 80-90% similarity with something that's already been published. If you're setting a threshold, an editorial assistant will say, oh, plagiarized paper, but no. It could have been on a preprint server, and it is totally legitimate. This is a very complex, nuanced world. Increasing editorial workloads because of the kind of things we're having to do. Textual duplication checking, as I say, using similarity checking is almost the norm in international journals, the expectations. It takes up time, resources. Images, this is a really big issue. Many journals do not have time to check images, but a case study this year has meant that many journals, especially the top journals, some do, Journal of Cell Biology have done it for many years, others do it randomly, are going to have to look at it more closely. Elizabeth Bick in California, she by eye looked at 20,000 published papers. I mean, the time this month, she looked at all the images and she looked for duplications in published papers. And she found 4% of them had problematical images. Half of them probably intentional. So all those journals have been notified, and we're going to be seeing retractions. So journals are having to look. The reviewers missed them, the editor missed them, the editorial missed those. And when you look at them, they are so obvious. She spotted these by eye. And what is happening with all these new people coming into scholarly publishing is they're all competing for the same reviewers, authors, and editors. You have to make your journals attractive to the community. How do you get people to submit to you? But researchers are under increasing pressure. Everywhere I go, when I ask the question, people say yes. And this quote comes from 1991, and I think it's even truer. This is by Stephen Locke, who was an editor of the BMJ. And in his peer review book, he said, and underlying these worries was yet another, that scientific articles have been hijacked away from their primary role of communicating scientific discovery to one of demonstrating academic activity. Because that's now what it has become. It's not about communicating. People are playing a game. Because that's what is required at the moment. There is still obviously legitimate, we are communicating science, but there are many factors now which are contributing to a non-ideal environment. We have anecdotal evidence, but we also have a lot of surveys. And in the UK, the Nuffield Council on Bioethics in 2014 surveyed researchers, held discussion groups. The report is available on their website. And they found that, and this is a conservative figure, because whenever you ask people about the practices they've done themselves that are negative, you tend to get lower figures. But a quarter have been tempted or under pressure to compromise on research integrity and standards. When you ask people who else they've seen doing these, the number is always much higher. So 58% have seen others. And the Finelli meta-analysis from 2009 figures there for these kind of things, 72% had seen them for these questionable research practices, which is a very important concept in research. And I should just say, the reason I concentrate on research integrity among research so much is that most problems with research integrity do not come to light until that work is submitted for publication or published. It can be happening in labs, independent researchers working on their own, every discipline, arts, sciences, humanities, but it's when that work is submitted for publication, which is why all of you who are working in editorial offices, the load is getting higher and higher because we're seeing more problems. If we can eliminate the problems at research level, maybe then we can all concentrate on assessing the research and concentrating on the important things rather than trying to catch the problems. And young people seem to be feeling more pressure. I was a member of COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics, on the council for 3 years. And we carried out an analysis of the cases brought to COPE. Editors who are members, are there any journals here that are members of, there are 10,000 members, Committee on Publication Ethics. There's a hand. Yes. Have a look, because this is really important. Because again, it gives you international credibility to be a member of the Committee on Publication Ethics. You can also take your problem cases and they're anonymously discussed and you're given advice. These are written up. You can go and access these free. But we found that we were getting more and more complicated cases. They were not just single issues. The taxonomy we had didn't cover. We couldn't tag the cases. So in 2013, I led a project that we created a new taxonomy with 18 classifications and 100 keywords. And we re-tagged all 500 cases. And then did the analysis. And we presented this at the Peer Review Congress that year. So these are the 9 topmost discussed cases. Doesn't mean misconduct happened. It's what editors are bringing because they do not know what to do with these cases. So you can see authorship and plagiarism. They've always been big issues and they continue to be. And we were talking earlier about money for publication. And in China, and there are reports published in reputable journals of these, an author can be given $50,000 US to publish in one of the highest impact factor journals. Is this healthy? But in many of these countries, they don't just give it to the authors, they give it to a position of authorship. Could be the first author, the last author, depends on the discipline. So we're seeing more and more authorship squabbles, problems, fights, people contesting authorship position. Again, this is causing problems for editorial offices. But the big ones, the 4 that were increasing in the last time period we assessed, correction of the literature. Now, I know because I went through all the cases that this was because editors know something has to be done when they're notified an error. And if you're notified that there is something wrong with a paper, you have a duty as an editor to correct the scholarly record. We know it isn't. There are people who are not doing it. Some publishers are scared of being sued by authors, so there are some problems. But the editors don't know, should it be a correction, a retraction, an expression of concern? So this kind of discussion goes on. Data. And the 2 big issues in there, data ownership and image manipulation. But today I'm going to concentrate on peer review, because this is what shocked me. I should just say, we did this because we needed, as a voluntary council, to where do we divert our resources to create resources for the community. So I'll leave this here. We created the COPE ethical guidelines for peer reviewers because none existed. So journals can use these. They can give them to early career researchers as a refresher to anybody. They're free online, but there is a hard copy here. And what happened in 2012? We heard has anyone heard of the fake reviewer cases? Yes. Just a few people. I will explain them because, as I say, we heard this at COPE anonymously, and when we heard this case, I thought, whoa, I didn't think anything could exist like this. So I will explain what this first case was. What this researcher did, it was very imaginative. He published for quite a while before anyone realized anything was wrong. And the thing that alerted people that something might be wrong was because every time one of his papers was reviewed at a journal, the reviews came back within 24 hours. Now, anyone who is a journal editor, you know that that is so unusual. Or if you're an author. So they started looking at it. Now, all journals, many journals, ask authors to suggest suitable reviewers. You'll hear people saying preferred, recommended. I don't use that. It's quite legitimate, but an author should put in people who are people that could do a good job. This person, he actually made up people. These people did not exist. And he created email accounts for them. He then sent this with his manuscript submission to journals. And those journals sent those manuscripts to those email accounts without checking. He and his friends reviewed his own papers. Of course, they were positive, and they were published. Of his 35 retractions, because he's done other things that are negative, 28 of them are for fake reviewers. He also did something that was fraudulent, because the other thing he did was for famous people, he created email accounts. Now that is fraud, because he pretended to be someone famous in the field. So at Retraction Watch, and if anyone hasn't looked at Retraction Watch, please go and look at it. I've got a daily sign up for alerts. There are about 4 coming through a day of the kind of problems that are going on in scholarly publishing. They are a smaller percentage, but they are a real issue for everybody. So when Retraction Watch asked this researcher why he did it, he said they could be mistaken for fake reviews, but he said it wasn't only his mistake. The editors invited those reviews without confirming the identity of the reviewers. This is the bread and butter basic job of editorial offices, of editors. Who are you approaching? And there are a whole range of checks that any good journal will be doing before they even approach somebody, let alone inviting people who did not exist. But we now have hundreds of cases. Since then, in the intervening years, I think I've got it in the next slide, I'm just going to slip to the bottom one. Retraction Watch itself has 319 retractions due to fake reviewers. That's a tenth of the retractions that they've reported on in that time. Every subject discipline, every major publisher, some major publishers have had to retract 60 papers at a time because of this. It's a new way of publishing. So the literature is polluted. We do not know often, what is right, what is wrong. But there are even more imaginative things. So we have more authors from different countries doing this. We now have the third-party services suggesting fake reviewers. And when Biomed Central was one of the publishers, they had to investigate their cases. The authors were innocent. It was the people they used to help them with submission and everything who were creating fake reviewers. So again, the reputation of the researchers was damaged. And China, in fact, it has recently released, well, it's been reported recently, but it happened a year or so ago, 5 things researchers there cannot do. And one of the things they cannot do is have this kind of service provider doing for them or submitting the manuscript for them. Because there are manuscript submission services now that submit on behalf of an author. You are one removed from the author. Who is signing the policy boxes? And then we have editors creating fake reviewer accounts so they can submit a positive review. We have people who aren't editors offering to be guest editors at journals so they can edit a special issue. This is a world which those of us who come from where scholarly publishing was revered, respected, this is happening in it, and we have to try and cut it out, spot it. And you're doing inviting of reviewers. WAMI, the World Association of Medical Editors, did publish some guidance on what you're supposed to be doing. I'm not going to go through it because you can go and read it. But the important thing is that some of these publishers and journals that were caught is because they were using all author-suggested reviewers. You should never, ever use all author-suggested reviewers. You should be a balance between the two. Quite legitimate to use them, but you must balance them with your own choice. But it's very sad that one of the things they say, while these recommendations are intended to help prevent the problem of fraudulent peer review, other methods to subvert peer review undoubtedly will be developed. So we have to be one step ahead of these people and try and have procedures, knowledge in journals that will stop this kind of thing happening. And unfortunately, fewer and fewer people are working, where you may have had 3 people working in a journal, you may only have 1 now because resources are stretched. Whose responsibility is that checking and verification? Where you have a central editorial office, it becomes easier. But even in those cases, I've seen cases where the editors, the academic editors are supposed to be doing it, but they didn't know. They didn't know what to do. They were maybe working for 4 journals. They don't know the procedures at each. So if you do have a system where your editors are checking, do people exist? Refresh, tell them the knowledge, refresh their knowledge, remind them. But it is far better to do it centrally if you have a central editor, because you know what you're doing. And it is very quick and easy to do. We wouldn't have dreamt of approaching anybody without looking at various things. And this is why Orchid is so important. Who in this room has their own Orchid identifier? So we have a few people, yes. Anyone who is a researcher should definitely have one. Even someone peripherally. I mean, I use mine for everything because people know who I am. They can click through, that proves who I am. But for researchers, because journals are requiring it and funders are requiring it because they have been stung by who is this person we've approaching. So go and have a look and get it. It's very easy quick to set one up. And then I use mine in my email footer, and I ask journals, anywhere I publish, I say, please, would you include my Orchid ID? So just go and have a look at that. Now, I'm just going to go through a few unethical practices, because I know they exist, and they exist in journals at every level, international journals. And I should say, I've met people from small local journals who have better peer review process than some of the big journals. Size of journal, location is no indicator of peer review quality. It's the people within there, what they do and their knowledge and their relationship with the research community. I can't stress how important, it's always been important for good journals to be part of their research communities. And I started our journal with our editor-in-chief in 1990, and we grew it to be a large international journal publishing bi-weekly, with the #2 impact factor journal in its field. We didn't do it by publishing reviews. We didn't publish reviews. We did it by becoming part of the community, treating people well, making them want to come to us rather than another journal. And that takes a lot of work and effort, but it is a very, very rewarding experience as well. This came up when we were creating the ethical guidelines for peer reviewers, because in there is something against this. Editors acting as reviewers for manuscripts they're handling anonymously. This shouldn't be done. And when I tell researchers that this happened, and an article appeared in the Times Higher Ed after we presented this at one of our annual meetings, researchers are horrified that a work that they have submitted to a journal, there's one reviewer, and that reviewer is the editor, and they don't know it's the editor. That's not peer review. If you tell people, if you make it transparent that I'm the editor, I'm going to review your paper, maybe because I can't find another reviewer, but I've got one reviewer, or you give the editor a choice. It's a dialogue, it's an interaction with the author. Give the author a choice as well. Or you could put it onto the system with your name, so everyone knows, and that's a good way to do it because the other reviewers can see that as well. Who oversees the editor? You can have total abuse of power. They could publish anything they wanted if there are no other reviewers. So it is, I think, unethical. It's a deception. And good editors stand by their decisions. They make clear what it is they're doing. And in the guidelines, we put, if they are the editor handling a manuscript and decide themselves to provide a review of that manuscript, do this transparently and not under the guise of an anonymous review if the journal operates blind review. Providing a review for a manuscript being handled by another editor at the journal can be treated as any other review. And that's absolutely fine, because especially on high caliber journals, you, on your editorial board, probably have the world's experts on your board. So you want to be able to use them, and that is absolutely fine. Selective editing of reviews. This is another Times Higher Ed article where researchers came across each other, one who had reviewed, one was the author, and the reviewer said, oh, I reviewed your paper and I liked it and I submitted this positive review. And the author said, I didn't get that review. They only was sent the negative reviews because maybe the editor wanted a negative decision. That's not right. You shouldn't cut out things that remove either positive or negative, because you should justify your decision. But there is, and I cover this in the book, when are you allowed to edit reviews? Because you can, not just for language, because we're an international community, everyone realizes the standard of English will vary. That's a given. But to remove anything libelous or derogatory. And again, I give examples, but one sort of case is the reviewer had written about a very senior researcher. X has never had an original idea in his life, and if he did, he wouldn't know what to do with it. Very rude. So we cut that out. If you need to clarify things, do that in the covering letter, do that in the editorial letter. There might be language, like use of the word honest, dishonest. In different cultures, these mean different things, but the editor should be there to say, we will explain to the author what is actually meant, or anything that is very colloquial, we say, you know, or confusing. Make it clear to the authors. And this is, and I've heard in editorial meetings where editors have suggested they do this, not realizing it's unethical, where they want people to cite their journal more. So they suggest in decision letters, oh, could you cite paper 1, 2, 3 from our journal in your article? Because of the power imbalance, the understanding is almost, if you do this, your paper will be accepted. Totally wrong. You should only ever suggest citation if it is legitimate, because these cases that have been found, the editors were asking for citations in that crucial 2-year impact factor window. So Thomson Reuters have, over the past few years, delisted journals that have been found to be guilty. And you can go and look at the list, 27, 30 journals that occurred last year, or excessive self-citation by anybody, because they also monitor self-citation, and it depends by discipline, because in certain disciplines it's high, in others where they expect the norm to be very low, if someone rises above that, they go and look at that. They've got algorithms. They keep creating new algorithms to deal with the gaming that they see. Now, this is something anyone asked me to put in. Editors submitting manuscripts to their own journal. Is it acceptable? Now, in Retraction Watch, you will see cases or editors using their own journals like their own publishing platforms. 80% of the articles their own. Who is reviewing those? Who is making the editorial decision? That is totally unethical. That's not peer-reviewed editorial. There's not editorial control. And they are surfacing. But it is totally acceptable to have papers from your editor-in-chief, your editors in your journals. And again, if you are a high impact factor journal, and in my old journal, we wanted to publish the work of our editorial board. They were some of the top people in the world. We didn't want that work to go elsewhere. And we were extremely rigorous. And the editors were always proud to say, I've been rejected by the plant journal, you know, because they were rejected too. But you have to have total transparency. You have to have policies. Who is going to handle this paper? That person who is submitting the paper must have no knowledge of anything to do with the review, the editorial decision-making. This used to be difficult with the online systems, because we used to test the online system, especially when the editor-in-chief had a paper. Can they see who reviewed it? The kind of reports, and if you're a good journal, you will send out monthly reports, weekly reports, depending on your frequency of publication, to your editorial board on rejected manuscripts, manuscripts rejected without review. And the COPE has, in its Code of Conduct for Editors, go and have a look there, because it tells you what you should have. But it's up to each journal to decide their own policy and publish it. Make it clear. So when the international community is scanning across your information for authors, they see, they have thought of it. They are at the forefront of what is considered important in the scholarly publishing world, in these kinds of things, the awareness. So what's coming next for scholarly publishing peer review? Things are changing so rapidly, nobody can predict. Large organizations are trying to maintain their standing, but very quickly, things can change. There are new players coming in, some of whom will succeed, some of which are very, very questionable. But I think without doubt, we're going to have a new and heterogeneous world. It's going to be very different. The way you publish is going to be different. The way you disseminate research, the kind of things that count. Data set creation, curation. What does a single data set that someone does that lead to? That is important. And the funders particularly are very, very keen. They're looking at ways, how do you monitor this kind of thing? How do you know what's happening in the future? Will peer review survive? And I'm delighted to see the Lithuanian translation. So Eleanor, thank you for all your work, because I know Eleanor did a lot of work on the translation. In the middle, that's how I like to see copies of my book used, post-it notes, because I wrote it so it would be a practical guide, so you could look up, and I look it up, and I used it to tell our editors. I would just refer them to a page number. So I hope those of you who use it will find it useful. And there is a Chinese translation as well. So in 2007, when I wrote the book, I said, peer review at its best is a very powerful and sophisticated tool. Since so much hinges on it, it is essential it's carried out well and professionally, and it is viewed with confidence and respect. And today, I still feel exactly the same. It isn't viewed with respect because of these failures. People just say, oh, we'll do it ourselves. Look at what scholarly publishing is doing. They cannot even review things, and we're paying money now. We're paying money. But who will be running it? What will it look like? All these things are totally open at the moment. And I think size of the organization does not matter. It's innovation, how you put it into practice, and what researchers want and need. Not what everyone else thinks they need. What do they actually need? And I personally feel that the editor has an absolutely critical role. There are journals now that don't have editors. Everything is done automatically. It's automated. But this is a critical role. But you have to act as editors. Most editors are not trained. The researchers, suddenly they're making next day, as an editor, decisions on manuscripts that affect people's promotions, grant funding chances, everything, but they are not trained. And at my journal, I used to work one-to-one with our new editors for 6 months, 9 months, however long it took, till they did things the way we wanted ethically, hopefully, to do things, and for the research community, not for any other reason. It's not about just moving manuscripts through online systems. Just because you know how to use an online submission peer review system doesn't mean you know how to operate peer review. It's just a tool. It's a tool like paper was, like an index card system was. You can't say, oh, 2 reviewers have recommended acceptance, 1 not, I will accept. Because the one who has said no, maybe has picked up a technological flaw, which completely overrides the 2 positive because they did not spot it. So somebody has to go in and analyze that. And do not pass the responsibilities on to reviewers. I have heard so many reviewers say, I'm doing the editor's work. I've got a manuscript, it's not even in the scope of the journal. That should never have gone out. Manuscripts that are in such poor English that the reviewer cannot understand them. And I say in that case, get back to the journal. They should not have sent you that. An early career researcher sometimes will struggle thinking, I must review this, I must review this. No, you send it back with a polite note saying, I would love to review this, but I'm afraid I cannot understand the paper because of the way it is written. Totally legitimate. And also, editor, it's a hard job. You can make enemies because you make hard decisions. And people will often, you'll hear researchers say, the reviewers accepted my papers, the reviewers rejected. They didn't. They advised the editor, and the editor decided. They made a decision based on all the information that they have. And they acted hopefully fairly and ethically, because those are the good editors. And I've met so many really good, committed editors. But what can journal editors do to try and stop problems occurring? And each discipline is going to be different. Because if you work in your community, like in my community, the plant science field, 6 journals got together and we decided that we would make it a policy that we would not publish anything unless people shared the materials and data. And we all 6, because the 6 top journals had done that, we were able to change the culture within the community on that, something like that. Have guidance. Information for authors. Authors hate these because they're impenetrable. You may have 4 pages on formatting a manuscript. That's not relevant nowadays. Have a link out to something, but make even that comprehensible on what is required. Start with the important things. And some of the newborn digital platforms that you'll see from the new players, they're beautiful. They're simple, they're straightforward. Anyone going in can quickly assess, what do I need to do for submission to this journal? There are many journals where what they have on their websites is totally different than what you come to submit. And when I've submitted manuscripts, I thought, that's totally different than I was told there. What's right? I'm halting the review process, submission process. That's not a good thing. And I used to make my staff each year submit a manuscript on the online system to appreciate the difficulties that authors have, but also to spot all these discrepancies, to make what you say on the website the same as you say on your online submission system. How do you keep up to date? This is a big issue because it is hard. I use Twitter a lot because I don't know if in Lithuania people use Twitter a lot, but it is one of the most valuable places now for getting professional information, as long as you know what you're doing. Because often discussions that you see 3 months later happening somewhere else, you think, well, many of us had that discussion already on Twitter. But some voices allowed doesn't necessarily mean they're right. Create policies, have discussions on the new things at editorial board level, write them down and publish them. What's your policy on prior publication? This is a very, very big new issue, and sometimes authors at some journals get sent rejection letters. The publisher then writes saying, oh no, that's fine, because our policy, we allow prior publication in XYZ. Preprint servers have made that very, very important. Have that discussion at editorial board level. Junior people can help educate people at the top. And I was delighted with the COPE ethical guidelines for peer reviewers because I like to give power to more junior people. So it gives power to researchers, but it also gives power to editorial assistants. It is very hard for an editorial assistant with a very prestigious editor-in-chief who tells them to do things they know are unethical, not to do them. So in there, we have put something, it was about the editors acting as reviewer. And I had an editor-in-chief call me once and says, my editorial assistant says, we're not supposed to do this, but I'm ringing you because I don't think this can be right. And I said, no, your editorial assistant is right. You should not be doing this. And so they changed their policy. So again, it gives powers. But as I don't assume even the most basic knowledge, like the example I gave you, you cannot submit the same manuscript. So this is why I'm focusing my efforts, and this is my thing. It was published in the Beilstein Institute magazine a few weeks ago. I've used it in talks before. The pyramid of research integrity. What do we do globally? There have to be global guidelines. The World Conferences on Research Integrity have produced some. There is a start to this. But each nation has got to look at these and think, how do we interpret it for our own national circumstances? It will not be the same in different countries because the issues are different. Then each institution should be looking and creating its own structure of how they act ethically. And it is at all these stages, and then the research group leaders, down to the individual researchers. Learned societies, funders, journals, publishers all have impact here because they have expertise in a lot of these things. They can help. But people who are knowledgeable, not people who are just picking up what they think is the latest thing. So I've been working with a university in the UK, the University of Dundee, over the past 2 years on a project. How do you make research integrity training, because it doesn't exist to a large extent, scalable? How do you make it engage people? Because there are guidelines and guidelines. You could read them as a researcher, but how do you bring that to your own research? So we created an online research resource of videos, booklets, a multiple choice quiz, because all their first year PhD students will have to have this course, and then they have to pass the multiple choice quiz to get through to the second year of their PhD. The staff will also have access to this. And what is most valuable is because being at COPE and dealing with a lot of cases, discussion is the most valuable thing because it's not cut and dried. Ethical issues are not black and white, they're grey areas. Many researchers, even senior ones, don't feel comfortable holding a discussion session on authorship, on plagiarism. So what I've created with the case studies that everybody will access at postgraduate level, early career, for the more senior people or people running discussion groups, notes for the moderators that give them what is up to date and pointers to the literature to give them confidence to hold one of these. And I'm going to leave you with this final thing because this is a really big issue. What can be done with peer reviews? Who owns the peer reviews? It never used to be an issue, only legally sometimes, and a peer review and peer reviewers' name, to my knowledge, has never been released legally, even when challenged by a court. COPE ran a discussion on it. There are discussions on Scholarly Kitchen because you'll be aware there are certain organizations now that have been set up to reward reviewers. Reviewers should be rewarded. They should be recognized. It is an academic activity, but it has to be done the right way. What if reviews at your journal that you think are confidential between you and the author suddenly appear somewhere? You have to discuss this and make it clear on your journal websites. What are people who are submitting to you, reviewing for you? What do you allow about this? So this is a very big current discussion. Go and look at these kind of issues. So I just wanted to say thank you, Achu. Is that the right pronunciation? Thank you for listening.